Hey, this is Dr. Kurt Jarris. I'm here with my friend Dr. Mike Licona, and we're talking about his new book, Jesus Contradicted: Why the Gospels Tell the Same Story Differently. Mike, in the book you talk about compositional devices, but tell me, how far does this concept go in the Gospels?
That's a good question. I think the furthest we see them going is how they use Old Testament scripture. And they do what we would call repurposing. So they will take a verse that meant a certain thing in the Old Testament and they repurpose it to mean something very different in the New Testament. And so I think that is something like probably the most radical example that I've seen has to do with their dealing with Judas and the 30 pieces of silver. And so it's Matthew again, right? And so after he throws the 30 pieces of silver, and then they take it and they bought the potter's field, okay? Then Matthew says this was to fulfill what Jeremiah the prophet said. And then he quotes it. Well, when you look for that quote in Jeremiah, you're not going to find it because it's in Zechariah. But there is one word, the word field, which is found in Jeremiah. But it is in a totally different, completely different, unrelated text in Jeremiah. So is the one in Zechariah, but he takes field from Jeremiah, puts it in the Zechariah text, gives it a very free, loose paraphrase, and then assigns a meaning to it, which is entirely foreign to what either Zechariah or Jeremiah went, and then says, thus the scriptures were fulfilled.
The prophets say this. And it's a composite, basically.
It's a composite.
Two different.
Now they do composite citations quite a bit, and that was not unique to the Christians. The Jews did it. The Greeks, the Romans did that as well. But the Christians did it quite often, and they certainly did the repurposing more than others did. So we wouldn't want a pastor doing that today. But the gospel authors did that quite often.
Could you think of another example of where you see compositional devices going beyond maybe what we're feeling comfortable with?
So Theon talks about something called elaboration, where you'd take something, a story, and you would just elaborate on it and put details in there. We find that happening with speeches, of course. It's well known, and classicists have recognized this for some time, and then people who are specialists say with the book of Acts, people like Craig Keener, Ben Witherington, and others know that, since there was no one there really that's going to be, we don't have any recording devices, and these are fairly long speeches, right? That these are sermon summaries of these speeches that were given. And a lot of these speeches, you could see, what Lucian of Samosata says in his book, How to Write History, in the middle of the 2nd century, that the writer, the historian, is free to take their oratory skills and to really make that speech good. So even like in the war with Catiline, there is a time when Catiline gives his speech to his troops right before he's fighting the other Romans that have come out to destroy him because he's rebelling against Rome. And there were no survivors. They were utterly destroyed. So how would we know what he said in that speech? Well, we wouldn't. So, but what Sallust does, who's one of the greatest Roman historians, Sallust does is he reconstructs a speech as it probably, some of the things that he would have, Catiline would have said in order to encourage his army. There's another text in Plutarch where Julius Caesar is coming in from winning a battle. And so it was traditional for the Romans to go out and meet him and congratulate him, just as they would a general. And there's a time when Trebonius wants to talk to Antony about assassinating Caesar and see would Antony join them. And so there's no record of when, we know that this happened, but there's no record of when it actually happened. So what Plutarch does in his life of Antony, I believe it is he elaborates and he creates a scene in which Trebonius and Antony are sharing the same tent in order to have this conversation. So John Ramsey, a classicist who's a friend of mine, he said that meeting would not have taken place at that time. But Plutarch creates this to narrate this discussion and the time, the actual location when it probably didn't happen at that time.
Okay, let me ask a follow-up here. If we see that the evangelists are elaborating and constructing scenes, does this cast doubt on the reliability of what they say happened?
In a modern sense, if we were reading modern biography, perhaps, but we're not reading modern biography. So their objective, we should be looking at seeing if they're giving us an essentially faithful representation of what occurred.
Or the gist.
The gist. And I think we do get that with that. Gary Habermas is my best friend. I've known him for, I don't even know how long it's been. I guess I first met him in the fall of 1985. So, whatever that is.
Well, that'd be 38 years. 38 years.
40, yeah, something like, so it's been a while. So I know how Gary thinks about a variety of things. Let's say that Gary dies 10 years from now, and then something comes up and people are saying stuff about Gary that I know is not the way he thought. Maybe they're misinterpreting the way he wrote something. And I could come and say, no, Gary didn't believe this because this is what he said. And I could take his words and rephrase them to expand and elaborate on what he has said in order to make his point clear. I don't think that would be error. It's not exactly what he said, but I'd be given the gist of what he said. Now, if I said this is verbatim what he said, then I'd be deceiving. But I wouldn't say that. I'd say, well, this is what Gary told me at one point. Maybe I'm not using his exact words, but I'm using his thoughts. F.F. Bruce, as conservative a New Testament scholar as he was, he said that John, when he's taking the Jesus tradition, things that, he was one of Jesus' closest disciples, right? And he said when he's writing about what Jesus said and did, it is an expanded paraphrase, a translation of the freest kind, a transposition into another key, and so much more. So, does this make it unreliable? In my view, as long as we're talking about reliability in terms of giving us an essentially faithful representation or an accurate gist, I'd say it's reliable. But if you really want to judge this according to precision, then you're going to have to say it's not reliable.
Yeah, it's a really rigid view.
I think so.
And an expectation or standard upon the Gospels that certainly didn't exist in that day.
No.
Yeah.
There's only one author that wrote with that kind of precision back then. His name's Asconius. And most of the viewers will never have heard of him, because most of what he wrote did not survive. They weren't looking for that. That's not what they were looking for back then.
Interesting. Well, if you want to learn more about compositional devices, check out Mike's new book, Jesus Contradicted: Why the Gospels Tell the Same Story Differently. We've dropped the link in the description below.